Welcome to She is Resilient, a podcast for women on their healing journeys who are ready to start living their most authentic and empowered lives outside of survival mode. I'm your host, Tatiana, trauma and somatic therapist, as well as a holistic coach, and I'm on a mission to help more women heal their nervous systems. Each week, me and my guests are going to get real and vulnerable about the experiences that led us to becoming the empowered and resilient women we are today. You'll leave this podcast with the skills, knowledge, and inspiration to start creating the life you deserve. Because if another woman can do it, so can you. Welcome back to another episode of She is Resilient. Today we have Valerie on the podcast. I met Valerie on social media and I feel like I already know you, even though we've never actually met. It feels like we know each other because we've been connecting for, I want to say probably at least a year and a half, maybe even more than that on social media, just kind of like engaging with each other's posts and I don't know, chatting in the DMs and all of that. So I feel like I know you, but I don't actually know you. So, Valerie, tell us who you are and what you do for a living.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Valerie Divetta. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Texas. And I primarily work with women that are experiencing people-pleasing tendencies, lack of boundaries, particularly stemming from their childhood experiences. And my second specialty is working with couples that also struggle with communication and connection, lack of connection.
I love that. Cool. So, Valerie, tell us a little bit about your healing journey because this podcast is all about sharing the struggles that we've overcome to get to be the empowered women that we are today. And so, I'd love to hear more about how you started your healing journey to become the human you are today.
Well, I'm gonna preface that with saying that I'm still on a healing journey,
Of
right? It's
course.
every single day. It's still, one of those
Mhm.
things where it's like I either have the tools or I forget to use. So it's always, trying to go back to basics or trying to remember that I need to stand on my very sacred ground of some sort. But I actually started attending therapy, I would say probably about 5 years ago for the very first time. And it really hit me hard when I was in a therapy session with a client. And her experiences didn't really have anything to do with my experiences, but for some reason, anytime this client came into session, I always felt like I needed to mentally, emotionally, and physically prepare myself for having these types of sessions. They were really, really hard sessions, and I had done hard sessions before, but this one was, I don't know, there was something in particular about this one, right?
Mhm.
And I remember going next door to my therapist friend at the time and just kind of saying, like, I was in tears and I was just saying, like, I don't know what's going on with me. Every time I'm, with this person, something hits really hard. And I asked her if it would be, what would people think if I, as a therapist, started going to my own therapy sessions, And it was
Mhm.
and she was like, no, like you need to do it, right? And for some reason for me, I was like, no, I should have it all together. What's going on with me? I was really harsh
Mhm.
and really critical with myself. And I think at the time for myself, it was just like still a big stigma, for people in the healthcare industry to seek their own therapy and get on that journey. So I did it, but let me tell you, it took a good like 3 to 4 different therapists for me to find my own therapist.
Mhm.
And when I did, I stuck with that person and continue to see them till this day. But it's been a journey before
Mhm.
I realized that I needed my own therapy. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can totally relate to that. I feel like as a therapist, sometimes it feels like you do have to have it all together. And I think that other people forget that we are also human too, right? Like, I think that people see us as professionals, as providers, and they might think that we do have to have it all together and that we don't have any problems. But the reality is that being a therapist doesn't make us immune to mental health, to trauma, to all the things that, humans experience, right? I love that you mentioned that it took like three or four therapists because I think that a lot of the time people go to one therapist and they don't have a great experience and then they're like, oh no, all therapists are like that. But I had the same experience too. And I think it's also harder as therapists. I think it's a little bit harder to find therapists as therapists because we already know what we're looking for, and we know what works for us. But I think it's normal to kind of like shop around and have like three, four, even five, six therapists before you find the one.
Yeah, and let me tell you, it's exhausting, right? It's exhausting to go through that process. It's exhausting to have to retell your story. And the first time that I went to go see a therapist, I thought, this person would be the one just based off of what I read about them, right? You do your research, of course. And I did. I did my research, but I really felt like this particular therapist may have been intimidated that I was also a therapist and tried to be more of my friend than anything. And I remember telling this therapist, like, I don't need a friend. I really need somebody that's going to challenge me and somebody that's going to bring you know, bring up things from my past that you know about that could connect to what I'm experiencing in this moment. And I just didn't really get that. So I was like, okay, on to the next. But it took me, I kid you not, it probably took me almost close to a year to like get back into researching another therapist.
Hmm.
And some of the therapists that I really wanted to work with were not available, so it was a difficult journey, and I encourage my clients to do the same. Like, hey, I may not be your cup of tea, but look to me for as a resource to help connect you to other therapists that I,
Absolutely.
know may help you. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And then when you found the therapist that was a good fit, what was that experience like for you?
So it's been a really good therapeutic journey for me. I will also say that, as at the time that I realized that I needed therapy, I recognized that I had been what I thought was me just navigating life pretty well given my childhood experiences. I was like, damn, I'm pretty good, right? Like, I've really learned how to be resilient. It was not resiliency, it was very much avoidance and very much repression
Mm-hmm.
of situations that my mind and my body just learned to deal with, right? Very much survival.
Hmm.
And so, but I didn't know what I didn't know until then all these things started coming up for me. And I was like, what the hell is going on?
Hmm.
Why am I struggling so much with this particular client?
Hmm.
And it wasn't until that I started like really reflecting on my own childhood experiences that I was like, well, it's no wonder, right? It's no wonder that this is the reason why I'm feeling the way I am. One of
Yeah.
the things that I generally tend to tell clients is that you may go through life for, the first 20, 25, 30 years of your life feeling great and things are in alignment with your goals until one day you get, this external or even internal trigger that just kind of ignites everything that's been pushed down for such a long time. And I
Hmm.
think that's what happened to me. I think it was just like something just pushed the button and everything inside of me was like, ooh, like here it comes, ready or not.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know what that button was for you. What were you noticing internally or even externally with behaviors?
That is a great question because I do remember it was physical reactions for me. Primarily, I was like, every time I would see this client on my schedule or I knew that they were coming in that day, like I just all of a sudden started feeling like racing heart. My stomach would hurt, my body, my shoulders would tense up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I had already been seeing this client for, several months before.
Mm.
So I don't know for whatever reason, it just started occurring more often. And I started noticing it was with this particular client. It was no, they would leave.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt almost like a sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, it is something about this client that is triggering me. But it was, to answer your question, it was more physical aspects of me noticing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like the physical part of it is typically like the first sign, right? And sometimes it's hard to identify like those physical symptoms and like what's actually going on, but it sounds like you were able to kind of say, "Oh, there's something happening in my body that isn't sitting well." Were you able to find out what it was connected to?
With this particular client, or for my like I guess like the overall connection between this client and myself.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, like I said, her experiences were really nothing like my experiences.
Hmm.
I really don't know what it was. I think, even now, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what it was about this particular client. Maybe this client was just put in my path to just let me know that it was time. I can look at it that way. Um,
Yeah.
it was maybe also the energy that this client brought to the room was very much at like a slow and downward pace, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like, in other words, I was used to working with clients that were like anxious driven and oriented, focused, on the future. And this client was very much just allowing herself to sit in this space for what it is right now. And
Mm.
so I think that maybe that really triggered me because I'm like, come on, like, let's make progress. Let's do it. And they were definitely
Um,
not there. Very much opposite to what I was used to working with.
yeah, that's so interesting. And I wonder if that was an indicator because I know that you said, okay, now it's time for me to go into therapy. And you went into therapy, you started your healing journey then. But I'm curious to know if that was some kind of indicator for you also that maybe you were in this like sympathetic state where it was like go, go, go. And you were used to not only that with your clients, but were
Mhm.
you also used to that with yourself?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, right? Because she's very much opposite to my system, and the state of mind that I was like, oh gosh, like we're sitting in silence and we have to wait for a while. We have to, and yeah, my nervous system was always, pretty much like fight, flight. It was either
Mhm.
like, I'm going to move towards the situation, move towards people, or I'm just going to run away. I'm going to become avoidant, right? So
Mm.
my system really didn't know how to, what I tell my clients, be in the green zone, like be
Mhm.
grounded, be very much oriented to your surroundings. And
Mhm.
I had to learn how to do that.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know if was that something that was coming up for you in your personal life as well? Like, was it impacting your personal life? And were you noticing that it was impacting your personal life? Or was it something that you didn't realize until you started therapy?
Yep, it was the latter. I didn't realize that I was always on the move, always on the go. Like
Mhm.
I just thought, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. Like this is the way I've always
Yeah.
functioned. This is the way that feels like it's normal for me because it's gotten me to the place that I am today, right? Which is
Yeah.
again high functioning, right?
Yep.
I met all of these expectations, and so like, why would I need to change that?
Mhm.
Until I get myself in therapy and they're like, whoa, like you have been, you're running on empty. And
Mhm.
the reason why you are experiencing all of these things coming up for you is because your system can no longer, all the things that we know as
Mhm.
therapists that we tell our clients, right? It's like we know that about what they're experiencing, but then you reflect it back on yourself and you're like, no, that's not where I'm at. They're like, put a mirror in front. This is exactly where you're at.
Totally. Yeah. I know it takes me back to when I was living in this constant state of fight or flight. This was before somatic experiencing, and I can totally relate to you. It was completely normal for me, and it served me, right? Because I was always that employee that was always getting her work done. I was working with all of the clients that nobody wanted to work with, right? Because that my nervous system needed that constant stimulation, so it served me. Why would I stop? And yeah, it was completely normal until I started shifting things, right? When I got into somatic experiencing, I was like, oh, things are shifting inside. This doesn't have to be my normal. And I'm curious to know if there was a moment in your healing journey where you were like, oh my gosh, this I'm noticing a difference in my body, my emotions, my behaviors, or again, even like externally, the way that I interact with the world. Was there a moment like that for you?
Yeah, so right before I started therapy, this was the first time that I went to go see someone. Um, I was going to ask for a month off from work. I was working at the university with the medical school, and I was like, I was the only therapist,
Hmm.
and it was really hard to just navigate, you know. And so I was going to ask for a month off, and then I kid you not, within that same week that I was going to ask, the pandemic hit. And they were like, okay, everybody's working from home. Go home for a week. That's literally what they told us. Go home for a week. Oh,
Hmm.
okay. So we're going to be home for a week. Great. I will take it.
Hmm.
But then it was not for a week,
Hmm.
right? It was ongoing. And that was the moment that I realized, during the pandemic was that, oh, I like things to be a little bit slower.
Hmm.
And I started noticing shifts in my body because then I was able to give back to myself in ways that I wasn't able to before. Like
Hmm.
just the commute to and from, right? That takes an hour away out of like it takes an hour from my day. And
Hmm.
then, picking up my son at, daycare at the time and like all of that, by the time you get home, it's so
Hmm.
late and you don't really have time for yourself.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic is when I noticed that, hey, like I can actually eat breakfast in peace and I don't have
Hmm.
to be in a rush. And you know what? I can wake up and I can exercise and I don't have to be in a rush.
Hmm.
My body started noticing changes almost immediately
Hmm.
because I was no longer in this state of fight or flight, right? Like the rush of
Yeah.
the everyday hustle and bustle of things.
Hmm.
So that's what it was for me is like giving back to myself.
Yeah, I love that. And the nervous system loves slowness. You were able to take that time to nourish your body and actually do the things that maybe you didn't have the time to do before. And then you started to notice those shifts in your body. I'm curious to know if that shifted the way that you interacted with other people, like your relationships at home, like being a mom or with anybody else.
Yeah, and you know what, Tatiana, like I probably wouldn't have known how to slow down if I wasn't at my literal breaking point.
Hmm.
Like I think if that like if the pandemic had happened a year before, I probably would have also been in that same state of like, I don't like this, I need to be on the go. But
Hmm.
because I was at my literal breaking point,
Hmm.
I think I embraced the slowness. In regards to my relationship with my husband wasn't able to work, he had to stay home. And my son, they closed down his daycare, of course. And so they
Hmm.
were both here. And so it was great because I would have a session and then I would go out for a break and then I would come back
Hmm.
in,
Hmm.
and we could have these lunch breaks where we would sit and play and they were really intentional
Hmm.
connections with, each other where even like even now I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm getting back into like the same cycle that I was in prior to the pandemic
Hmm.
because now it's like, okay, everybody has their own schedules
Yeah.
and I don't feel like I have time to give back to myself. So that's why I talk about like this, mental health journey, this healing journey is an ongoing thing because there's always things that are occurring, right?
And have you done any other kinds of healing modalities, or has it always just been therapy?
It's just been, well, it's been therapy, but in regards to like healing modalities, I am going to talk earlier. You mentioned something that I wanted to pinpoint for myself as well, of like not being able to slow down, right? I was one of those therapists that did not know how to practice breathing exercises because my
Mhm.
nervous system was like, well, what are you doing? Why are you slowing
Mhm.
me down? I don't like that. So I would actually get more anxious and more nervous trying to
Mhm.
practice breathing. Um, when I remember this one time, it was myself and a group of therapists in a meeting, work meeting, and this other therapist was like, okay, we're going to do some breathing before. I got up and I walked out. I was like,
Oh
I'm
my
not
God.
doing that. Yeah. I was like, I'm not doing that because I was, again, avoidance, right? I was like,
Yeah.
it makes me feel anxious. It doesn't slow me down.
Yeah.
So I had to learn how to do that. Now I
Mhm.
can do breathing exercises. But the other thing I introduced my body to was yoga. Uh,
Ooh.
And that was transformational for just the way that I could connect mind and body. And
Hmm.
that is my slogan actually for my practice. It's mind body connection, right?
Yeah.
And here I was not really practicing that for myself prior to the pandemic.
Hmm.
And so that's been another, I call, it's a healing modality that I've utilized for a few years now, and it's been
Yeah.
really beneficial for me.
Yeah, yoga is amazing. And I think yoga is so great when you're in any survival state, fight, flight, freeze. Like it really brings you back to the present moment.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? I wasn't before. I'd be like, I don't want to do that. Again,
Totally.
yeah, because my body didn't recognize, how impactful slowing down could be.
Yeah.
I've been a high functioning, person for such a long time, for a big part of my life, that I didn't know how to do the opposite to that. So you
Hmm.
don't know what you don't know until it like actually hits you, and sometimes it's, that saying where you have to meet your clients where they're at the time. I
Hmm.
had to remind myself that I needed to do that for me too, like where
Hmm.
am I in this point in my life? Like what do I need right now as
Yeah,
opposed to thinking about what I'm trying to get to in the future.
totally. Yeah, 1000%. So I'm curious to know what are some daily practices that you do currently to support your body, support your nervous system?
Yeah, so I was going to yoga
Mhm.
every week. I would try to go at least 3 times a week. I say I was because now with the holidays coming up and things changing, I do tend to stop my membership in
Mhm.
November, just because I know I'm not going to be as consistent. But to replace that, I do try to be outside. I do try to walk.
Mhm.
My son has baseball practice in the evenings, and so I try to walk a mile around the park just to kind of
Mhm.
get my system flowing, because we sit all day speaking to clients, so that's really
Mhm.
hard. I'm very intentional about my food and
Mhm.
what I eat on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
So I always think about like our daily, functionalities, right? Our eating, our sleeping, our exercising, and of course our relationships. And
Yes.
so, how I sleep, what time I go to sleep, when I wake up is also super
Mhm.
important to me. And then connecting with my husband and my son on a daily basis, how
Mhm.
intentional that can be, sitting together for dinner, just anything
Mhm.
like that. So those are the four areas that I tend to focus on for myself.
I love that. Back to basics. Yeah.
Yeah, because then we overflow ourselves with
Mhm.
systems that either we don't prioritize or
Mhm.
we don't, include in our day to day, or for whatever reason, right? And then we're just harsh with ourselves, like, oh, I can't keep up, I can't do it. And it's like, well, you're doing way too much,
Mhm.
you're doing way too much. And so
Yes.
do what your body needs, which are the basic, fundamentals of life.
Yeah.
Drink your water, right?
Yes. Stay hydrated.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So I'm curious to know, since this podcast is called She is Resilient, I'm curious to know what are some tips for people who are trying to create resiliency in their bodies, in their nervous systems. If someone is just starting out on their healing journey, if you can go back to when you first started your healing journey, what are some things that people can do to create that resiliency?
Yeah, well, speaking for my own personal journey, what I needed to do was connect my mind and my body. They were
Mhm.
very disconnected, right? Like my body was telling me one thing and my mind was telling me another.
Mhm.
And I tended to lead with the one that felt more familiar, even
Mhm.
though it was no longer serving me. And
Mhm.
so I needed to learn to sit in that space of like, okay, what is my thought process right now? What is it trying to tell me? And then what is my body trying to tell me as well? Like, what are these messages that I can either connect or I can explore a little bit further?
Mhm.
So sitting in that space, right, and just kind of like exploring what that looks like for you.
I love that. Yeah. Always coming back to the body.
And you know what? Let me tell you something else that I started doing. Probably this is my second year, my second full year. When you ask like what else I've done, so yoga has been one of them, but
Mhm.
for almost December will be 2 years, probably even more. 2 years that I've gone to get a massage every single month. I have
I
not
love
skipped
that.
out on a massage for the
Hmm.
last 2 years because that is one way that I'm giving back to my body. If
Yes.
my body is holding so much tension and I'm not doing anything to alleviate that, all it's doing is building up, right?
Hmm.
So the first few months, my massage therapist was like, "Girl, what is happening in your body?" Because she just had such a rough time, like trying to get out these knots and these,
Hmm.
tension points. And now we're like at a good place where she's like, "Oh, okay, like you have, the knots, but they're not like years of built up
Hmm.
tension and trauma anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I committed to that for myself, for my body. I mean, I had like 30 some plus years of pent up tension. And
Hmm.
and even though I was doing other things, right? Like I grew up dancing, and that's a way to release, emotion and tension and
Hmm.
traumas. But again, we're not doing, other work to address the situations that you've
Hmm.
experienced. So yeah, commit to yourself. There's
Hmm.
been multiple times where I'm like, you know what, like I really need to finish this one thing. I'm gonna cancel my massage appointment.
Hmm.
No, because this one thing is going to be there when you come back. The massage appointment, you can, continue to put it off, but you're basically saying yes to this workload and no to yourself, right?
Yep.
Like, yeah.
I
What's
love
your,
that.
yeah, what's
Right.
your
Like,
yes and what's your no?
exactly. Yeah. What's more important? Thank you so much for sharing all of your tips and wisdom and sharing a little bit about your healing journey. Where can people find you if they're interested in connecting with you?
Yeah, so social media, Instagram and Facebook is at Inner Solace Therapy. And my website is innersolacetherapy.com
Wonderful. And remind us where you're located. Where do you see clients?
in Texas.
In
So yeah.
Texas.
So provide online services in Texas, and then in person, I am south of Texas. A lot of people don't know what south of Texas is because they're like, oh, San Antonio, Austin. I'm like, no, no, no. Keep going like 4, 5 hours of that. Yeah. So I'm located in Mission, Texas.
Wonderful. Awesome. I will include all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you absolutely loved this episode, I would so appreciate it if you subscribed and left a review on Apple Podcast, or take a screenshot and share this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at tatiana.holistic.coach. The more nervous systems we reach, the more generational cycles we break, and the more we contribute to a kinder and safer world. And if you're looking for somatic healing services, send me a DM and I'd love to chat on how I can support you. I'll see you in the next episode.